Senator Cruz, thanks so much for being with us this morning. Let's begin with Iran. Immediately, what do you think should happen?
Well, the past week has been a very good week for the safety and security of Americans. Taking out Soleimani. Soleimani was the most dangerous terrorist on the face of the earth. He was directly responsible, according to the Department of Defense, for the death of over 603 American servicemen and women. He had led active terrorist attacks against Americans, working closely with Hamas, with Hezbollah, both proxies of Iran. And taking him out was a very positive step for keeping our country safe. In addition to that, we saw Iran's rocket strikes directed at U.S. military bases, and we are grateful, we're thankful that there were no casualties, that those rocket strikes were ineffective. They did not take out any Americans. Now, tragically, we have since learned that they did take out a commercial airliner, that 176 souls were killed by the Iranians when it appears their air defense systems screwed up and they shot down a commercial airliner leaving from Tehran in the midst of the attack. And that, unfortunately, those are yet more lives tragically lost to the Iranian regime, and that sadly grows the death toll even more.
Senator, do you think Congress or leaders in Congress or the Senate should have been notified or brought into this process before the president's decision to launch the attack?
We had an extensive briefing with the administration, with the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, the Director of the CIA this week, where we discussed the intelligence behind the attack. We discussed both the policy issues and the risks. And I think that briefing, from my perspective, demonstrated there was more than adequate basis to take out Soleimani. He has been the most dangerous terrorist in the world, and indeed, other than Osama bin Laden, Soleimani is responsible for killing more Americans than any terrorist in modern times. I think the evidence against him was more than sufficient to launch the strike that took him out. Not only that, he was a uniformed combatant in Iraq, in theater, meeting with hostile forces and leading aggression against the United States. He had just directed an attack on December 27th that had killed an American and wounded several American soldiers, and he just directed an attack on the U.S. Embassy, and he was actively planning additional attacks at the time we took him out. I think the Commander-in-Chief was justified in doing so. I think he had legal authority to do so, and I think it made America safe. Now, that being said, the next step should not be and will not be a land war in the Middle East. And some of the congressional Democrats who are raising hysterical suggestions of World War III, that's not going to happen. Iran is a very dangerous place, and it remains a very dangerous place. But this president, I don't believe, has any interest in deploying troops and going to war in Iran. This was a targeted strike, taking out a terrorist, and should there be extended military conflict, which I very much hope there isn't, then I think for extended military conflict, you need congressional authorization. I've made clear to the administration that if we end up having to go down that road, and I hope we don't, then the case needs to be made to both Congress and the American people why the focus of any mission is on keeping America safe and saving the lives of Americans.
You just talked about troops. More than 3,000 have now been added to the number already in the Middle East.
Well, we have troops stationed all over the world, and I think their mission properly is a counterterrorism mission. Their mission properly is taking out terrorists who are targeting American citizens, who are trying to kill Americans. And you know, I think American foreign policy in recent decades has more than once gone off track because the mission of our military is not nation building. The mission of our military should not be trying to transform countries in the Middle East. I certainly would not support a mission of trying to transform Iran into some sort of democratic utopia, try to turn Iran into Switzerland. That's not our military's job. What is our military's job is to protect Americans, to keep this country safe, and taking out a dangerous terrorist like Soleimani is a great example. You know, this past week I introduced a resolution in the United States Senate praising the soldiers and sailors and airmen and Marines and the intelligence community that led to taking Soleimani out. That resolution has 39 co-sponsors. It is modeled, it is almost word for word like the resolution that the Senate passed praising the Obama administration for taking out bin Laden in a comparable circumstance, a strike that took him out. And in that instance, the bin Laden resolution praising the Obama administration, it passed the Senate unanimously. Every single Republican, every single Democrat in the Senate voted for it. The Soleimani resolution I've introduced is almost word for word identical to the bin Laden resolution. It ought to be bipartisan. I hope we will vote on it. But as of right now, every one of the co-sponsors is Republican because Democrats, congressional Democrats, are so driven by anger and hatred towards Trump that many of them are unwilling even to admit that Soleimani was a terrorist, despite the fact that he's been designated a terrorist by the U.S. government for many years, long before Donald Trump. He's been designated a terrorist by the United Nations for many years. So my hope is the partisan anger in D.C. can subside at least for a moment, and we can come together and speak with bipartisan unity, supporting our fighting men and women in the field who are fighting to keep us safe.
Senator, there have been Democrats, though, that have said that he was a terrorist, that he was a bad guy. They were just concerned about the process.
Well, look, and I hope those Democrats vote for the resolution then commending the military leaders that took him out. And I got to say that the process, when you have, in this situation, we had intel about where Soleimani was. He was in Iraq. He was in the battlefield, and you had a moment of visibility. And I think the commander-in-chief acted. I think he acted on the strong recommendation of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, of the Secretary of Defense, of the national security leadership. And I think that decision made America safe, and any congressional Democrats that are blasting that decision, I think they're playing politics rather than putting the safety and security of Americans first.
Senator, what should an impeachment trial in the Senate of Donald Trump look like? And will you personally go into that process with an open mind, or have you made up your mind already?
Well, in the Senate, when we see an impeachment trial, if Nancy Pelosi sends over the articles, and when you and I are talking, she still hasn't sent them, I don't know, that may happen sometime between when we do this interview and when the interview airs. The trial in the Senate is going to be fair. It's going to respect due process. Now, what does that mean? It means it's going to be very, very different from the one-sided partisan show trial that we saw in the House for the last several months. The last several months, House Democrats did an entirely one-sided hearing presentation where they didn't follow the precedent from the Clinton impeachment. They didn't follow the precedent from the Nixon impeachment. They didn't allow the minority to call witnesses. They didn't allow the White House to cross-examine those witnesses. So they presented only one side of the case. The Senate's going to be very different. We're going to allow both sides to present their case. We're going to give them a full and fair opportunity, the House managers, a full and fair opportunity to present their case. But we're also going to give the president a full and fair opportunity to defend himself. We're going to respect due process, which is the right way to do it. And at the end of that proceeding, if you look at the articles of impeachment the House has voted out, they are facially deficient. The House Democrats don't allege any violation of criminal law by the president. In fact, they don't allege any violation of any federal law by the president. It's the first time in history any president's ever been impeached without an allegation of criminal conduct. They don't go so far as alleging he committed a speeding ticket. And so I believe after a full and fair trial in the Senate, that the Senate, applying the constitutional standard for impeachment, which is high crimes or misdemeanors, are going to reject these articles of impeachment because on their face they don't meet that constitutional standard.
In the quick time we have left, Senator, do you think there should be witnesses in this trial?
You know, I think the way the Senate is going to proceed is we're going to proceed in two phases. And this is exactly how the Clinton impeachment trial happened. Phase one is going to be opening statements from the House managers, opening statements from the White House defense team, and then questions from senators. And those questions we won't be able to ask directly under the Senate rules. Instead, we'll write out questions, and the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court will ask the questions on our behalf. That's exactly how the Clinton impeachment proceedings went forward. By the way, that was agreed to unanimously. Every Republican, every Democrat agreed to that process with the Clinton impeachment proceedings. After phase one, I think we'll then have a vigorous discussion about whether additional witnesses are necessary. Look, I, for one, think after the House proceedings where they wouldn't allow minority witnesses, they wouldn't allow the White House to cross-examine witnesses, that if the president wants to call witnesses, if he wants to call Hunter Biden, if he wants to call the whistleblower, then I think due process demands that the president be allowed to defend himself and put on his defense. But the Senate will make that decision after opening arguments, after the initial round of senators' questions. Then we'll have a debate within the Senate about whether additional witnesses are necessary at that point.
Senator, we always appreciate you coming on. Please come see us when you're in Texas.
I look forward to it. Take care.